This is Isaac Morehouse. Welcome to the podcast where we discuss education, entrepreneurship, big ideas, how to put them into practice in the real world, and above all, how to live free. This episode is brought to you by Praxis, discoverpraxis.com. Derek McGill, who was interviewed on an episode from season 1, dropped out of the University of Michigan. He went from the dean's list to leaving school. Why? Because he was bored. Not because it was too hard for him or he wasn't good enough for an elite school. It just wasn't good enough for him. It wasn't bringing him what he wanted. It wasn't worth it. The prestige and the pleasure of others that he was there, not a good enough reward considering the life that he wanted to build. He quit. He joined Praxis. He's a digital marketing guru, all self-taught. After being in the program, we liked his work so much, we hired him on as our marketing director. Derek is one of many examples of young people today who are realizing the world is changing. It's changing fast. There's more opportunity than ever to be your own signal, to be your own credential, to create things and demonstrate your value creation potential through what you've done in tangible ways. Build a website, build an online presence, get work experience. Don't worry. It sounds overwhelming, but you get all of that in the year-long Praxis program. It's not easy, but no great adventure is. discoverpraxis.com/apply. You can join Derek and many others in building the education revolution, starting with your own life. All right, today I have joining me for a second time, the great Thaddeus Russell. Thaddeus is the author of among other books, his most popular, most recent book is A Renegade History of the United States. He was on a previous episode of the podcast, and Thaddeus is launching something pretty awesome called Renegade University. So Thaddeus, welcome, and tell us about Renegade University.
Thanks. Well, it is it's forming right now. It hasn't formally launched yet. I am pulling together some ideas, doing some market research, putting out the word and seeing what the response is. And so far, it's been pretty encouraging.
And the basic idea is for you to keep doing what you love, which is teaching on history and your sort of really unique history, focusing on the renegades, characters that often get overlooked and condemned in traditional histories, and continuing to do that, but in a way that is not only for those fortunate enough or unfortunate enough, depends on how you look at it, to pay tuition and attend a specific college where you happen to be teaching and get your class registered, but anyone, anywhere, whether or not they're a part of the academic structure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do a lot of things in the university, and I'm not even sure exactly how much, but, quite a bit of it will be based on material in my book. I'm going to offer a set of lectures based on the book, but with material that's not in the book as well. And then also lectures and seminars based on material in my forthcoming book, which is on American foreign policy and American popular culture abroad over the last 120 or so years. And that's actually gotten a very, very big response. In fact, that's in the market research has shown that that's the most popular topic. And then also, I'm very excited about doing a series of courses on the history of political philosophy, which I actually taught. That was actually the first thing I taught in graduate school at Columbia as part of their famous Introduction to Contemporary Civilization course, which is required for all sophomores at Columbia. It's this broad survey from Plato to the present, and I loved teaching it. And it's just sort of the bedrock of any liberal arts education, which is sort of being lost now. And it's not, of course, I don't have a conservative view of it. I mean, I don't. It's sort of how you talk about Plato and Aristotle. It's not, that we need to talk about these great men. So that's also gotten a big response. People have been very enthusiastic about that, and I can't wait to teach that as well. And it's going to be a combination of online lectures, which you can download in either audio or video format, online interactive seminars, and then in-person seminars, just regular classes in several cities. I've gotten enough response that I can launch seminars in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, New York City, Chicago, and Austin, Texas.
Wow.
Um, and then probably other cities, the more response I get. But those cities seem clearly to have enough people in them who want to do this. Yeah, and in terms of admissions and tuition, the admission policy is I will admit anyone who is interested in big ideas, and especially interested in being challenged by ideas that are new to them. And then tuition will be, I don't know exactly what it will be, but I know this: it will be a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of regular tuition at regular colleges.
You won't need to be paying it off for 30 years.
No. I can say this. I mean, I'd say that, I don't know, 80 to 90% of Americans could afford at least one class of mine.
Yeah.
So without any major sacrifice economically. So, I mean, in other words, we're talking about hundreds of dollars rather than many, many thousands of dollars. So, or less actually. But, so I'm hoping to begin offering courses in late spring, maybe early summer, right after I'm finishing this book I told you about on sort of the global history of the United States. I'm hoping to finish the manuscript by March or April, and then also I'm finishing teaching at a regular college at Occidental College at the same time. So after that, I'll be pretty free, and I want to devote almost all of my energy to Renegade U.
So, I was thinking about this, about you launching this, and there's so many things that are cool about it. But one thing that came to mind was this idea of the entrepreneur as a renegade. So you're kind of doing this entrepreneurial venture here. You're launching out on your own to do this university thing, and you're not sure exactly where it's going to go yet or what it's going to become, but you're directly selling your services, your products in a new way. And we think about, your book talks so much about renegades versus the sort of great men throughout history that are praised for their sort of Puritan virtues. And I think in business, when we think of business success, many people think of those Puritan virtues, being the leaders to business success. And maybe in the corporate world, that may be true, but it's so often entrepreneurs tend to have many more of those renegade characteristics. And in many ways, they're very much a part of that class you talk about, that group of people who they're not the ones giving speeches and getting all the credit for social change and saying nice things. They're just making stuff to sell to people to make their lives better. And by doing so, kind of undermining the status quo.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, most of the renegades in my book were entrepreneurs. And so, saloon owners in colonial America, right? Entrepreneurs, brothel owners, entrepreneurs. Most prostitutes were entrepreneurs. All the prostitutes in the West were entrepreneurs. They saw there was an opportunity in these Western boom towns, and they moved from the East to the West to make a lot of money, and they did, and gained a lot of power and a lot of sort of feminist freedoms and equality through that. The mafia, bootlegging in the 1920s during Prohibition, the founding of Hollywood, which was very entrepreneurial and semi-criminal. The founding of Las Vegas, same thing. Gay bars, from the first gay bars in the 1930s through the 1970s, when they were the only place gay men and women could go, and congregate safely. Those were semi-criminal, renegade, and totally entrepreneurial. So, over and over again, you'll see that you're right. I mean, it's kind of that entrepreneurs generally have been actually on the outside of respectable society, and that's definitely underappreciated in the history of business. In fact,
especially if you go like an MBA course or something, and maybe you'll learn some good stuff about business plans and whatever, but I think there's an underemphasis. And again, if you want to go work for a large Fortune 500, then sort of following all these rules and doing those things may be your ticket. But the big breakthroughs are usually dudes who are like men or women who are they're tripping on shrooms and getting inspiration and kind of doing crazy stuff,
Sure. Go ahead. I was just going to say, like, for a minute right after Renegade, I was kicking around ideas for my next book with my agent. And that was one of my very first ideas, was to do a history of renegade business.
Mm.
and which I might do someday. But it's really an undertold story.
Well, today, do you think that is expressed most frequently now, that sort of renegade entrepreneurship or business efforts in like the dark web and that kind of stuff, or where do you see it? Where do you see it predominantly?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the Silk Roads of the world is one place. The dark web generally, for sure. By the way, I did a really amazing interview with, I don't know if you know this, with Alex Winter, who made the documentary about
Well, so I
Silk
looked
Road.
for
Yeah.
it and it said the video was gone.
What?
I
On
couldn't
Reason?
find it. I went on Reason and the video it said this video no longer exists. So I'm gonna have to do some
Really?
more digging. Yeah,
Wonder if that's a legal thing.
that's what I wondered.
I didn't hear about. No one told me
And
about
then
that.
a
If it's
drone
true.
flew over my house like 3 minutes later.
Are you serious?
No.
Oh. um, yeah, I don't know, but anyway, I mean, yeah, this is kind of tangential, but like he's by far the smartest person I've ever encountered in Hollywood. Like he's which isn't saying a whole lot, but he's head and shoulders above all the other Hollywood people I've encountered politically. Super sophisticated, smart guy. But anyway, um, uh, yeah. So yeah, internet is full of sort of entrepreneurs who are either outside respectable society or on the fringes of it. I, you know, here's where you're going to find renegade entrepreneurs, though, in the ghettos.
Hmm.
I think in poor neighborhoods in the United States and across the world, I think those places are full of people who are operating businesses outside the law.
Hmm.
Well, we know they are actually. I think it's understudied. You'll find barbershops and hairdressers and shade tree mechanics, they're called.
Hmm.
Guys who work on cars under the shade of a tree, without a license. People selling all sorts of products. The documentary 12 O'Clock Boys about the Baltimore dirt bike riders.
No, I've not seen it.
Oh, it's a great
All right, I'm
documentary.
adding it to my list.
Highly, highly recommended. Yeah, 12 O'Clock Boys. There's a subculture in Baltimore among sort of black youth. They ride these dirt bikes through the streets and they kind of challenge the cops, and very sort of rebellious, free-spirited, independent-minded people. And they get all their dirt bikes from these underground dealers, who aren't selling drugs. They're selling dirt bikes, but they're still illegal. So I think that's just all over the place, and especially the lower you go on the socioeconomic scale, the more you're going to find of that. And that's true in history too. I mean, if you look at my book, it's clear that that's the case, right? The lower you go, the more entrepreneurial, extra legal activity you will see.
Yeah, and I always wonder. I mean, you even see that in you see it in schools where the kids the kids who are running things like schemes where people pay them to have somebody write a paper and all these they're often
Right.
or sneaking in. I was talking to a friend actually out there in Hollywood, and his son had this little side hustle going where they would stop at McDonald's on the way and buy like 20 egg McMuffins and sneak them in a gym bag and sell them in the school, because the school had like banned all unhealthy food and you couldn't bring in outside snacks or something like this. And they were making all kinds of money, and they got shut down. but what I wonder is how hard is it for someone who gains that kind of entrepreneurial skill and is doing something, sort of in the black market or in the gray market, underground. How possible is it for those people to sort of cross over into the above ground market? I mean, it seems like it'd be tremendously difficult if you wanted to do something, just the amount of capital required and things like legal representation, because by the time you get to a certain level of wealth, you start to attract attention. And if you're doing things illegally, it's not going to be the kind of attention that you want. But to try to transition into doing it legally requires a lot of capital. It just feels like there's a lot of entrepreneurial energy probably trapped in black markets.
Yeah, I mean, so I can speak to the historical record on this, and what I found, and this is kind of one of the main stories in Renegade History, is that it's not so much that the black market entrepreneurs became respectable, although some did, or became legitimate or legal. It's that the culture changed in accordance to that, right? So that the culture ended up adopting these businesses, markets, products, whatever they were, as legitimate and legal eventually,
Hmm.
right? And then it became perfectly legal and legitimate to, for instance, own a gay bar,
Hmm.
right? It became perfectly legitimate and legal to sell liquor, after 1933, largely really because of the mafia's subversion of prohibition.
Hmm.
Um, Same with saloons, same with, brothels for a time.
It's probably, I mean, that's a large part of what's happening in the world of the drug war with marijuana. It's
Oh,
just sort of, you just can't
right.
stop it. So the government's like, we might as well tax it, you know?
My God, I mean, just the history of weed, I mean, it's just there you go. I mean, we we have come so far in just the last 10 years. Just 10 years ago, if you had said, how I don't even know how many states it's now semi-legal or legal, right? I mean, if you had said that to anyone 10 years ago, they would have thought you were insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an amazing transformation that happens over and over again.
So I want to talk a little bit about your I want to get more into universities and Renegade University and things like
Yeah.
that. But I want to talk about your new book first. Do you have a working title for it?
Yeah, it's called Blood and Freedom,
Ooh.
A Renegade History of America Abroad.
Okay. And so you said it's about American foreign interventionism, I assume, in sort of the more policy realm, but also the pop culture parallel. Give me the thesis and what are some of the themes?
Yeah, so one thesis is basically the blowback thesis applied to, more than a century of American foreign policy. So I look at a series of interventions, military interventions, beginning with the Spanish-American War, and show that, blowback occurred, fairly consistently, in all sorts of ways, not just in direct attacks on the United States, but in the creation or fomenting of anti-American sentiment in various
So the
countries.
basic blowback concept is every time American troops get involved in some conflict, we create we basically endanger Americans further by creating enemies of America. Is that fair?
Right.
Okay.
We create anti-Americanism. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And so, but also simultaneously, all along that time, you have.
I shouldn't say we, by the way.
Yeah, no,
I don't want to be any part of this.
that is not a libertarian word. I gave a little talk about that in New Hampshire a few years ago. In fact, I said I love one of the things I love about libertarians is they never say we in the United States, except for Isaac Morehouse.
Oh.
No, it's okay. I know you're good. No, and then at the same time, you have this other thing that's contradictory, which is wonderful, which is that American popular culture is spreading all over the globe at the exact same time the U.S. military is spreading. So beginning in the Philippines after the Spanish-American War with the occupation of the Philippines, you have the spread of jazz in the Philippines, and Filipinos become sort of the greatest jazz musicians in that hemisphere, and they spread jazz and vaudeville across Asia, and create sort of this renegade culture in those countries. That's semi-American, but it's really a hybrid culture because they infuse it with native cultures as well. So it's not like they're just taking American jazz and copying it. You'll hear Filipino influences and then later Japanese influences and Chinese influences in the music as well. And they create a new musical form. And the important point politically here is that the music is uniformly hated by the political regimes. So you have the Filipino government, the Japanese government, the Chinese government, and it didn't matter if it was nationalist or communist, they all hated it because it was the music of freedom. It was the music of pleasure, individual freedom, sex, all the things that a nation state abhors. So you'll find this tension, or really it's a civil war going on that I show in the United States through Renegade History, in these other countries as well. That's sort of initiated by American pop culture. So you have blowback, which really works against, I argue, the interests of ordinary Americans.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have this renegade culture spreading, which works in our favor because people tend to be more sympathetic to America, and it tends to subvert these authoritarian regimes that we all hate.
Are there I don't know if you've sort of come this recent, but do you look at all at the more either the first Gulf War or the second, or Iraq and Afghanistan? You look at those areas at all, or is this a little bit
Yeah,
earlier?
no, the project actually started with an examination of the Middle East in the last 50 years, and on the with this very question, and I found the stuff that's going on in the Middle East in the last several decades is just astonishing. I mean,
what is the general? Is there like an average person, let's say in Iraq, who's not a part of any sort of military body? What would their opinion be if there is such data on this of America or Americans in general?
So they tend to dislike the military, they tend to dislike the government, and they tend to love Britney Spears.
So that distinction is there. They recognize that there's a culture and a people that are separate from the policy and the armies.
Well, I mean, I don't know how they would articulate it.
Yeah.
But we know that's true. I mean, not just from polls, but from sort of various political expressions, and then most importantly, from how they vote with their wallets.
Right.
Right.
So they love Britney Spears, huh?
Oh my God. So to me, the story of the Middle East is the satellite dish. If you go to, I think, pretty much any city in any Middle Eastern country, and look at they have these big apartment buildings in most of those cities, and you'll see in every case that they're covered in satellite dishes, and people are just streaming in Western stuff all day and all night. And then at the same time, Islamic fundamentalists and nationalists both are denouncing it and sending the police out to rip down those satellite dishes. And then, a few days later, they spring back up. This has been the history of Iran in particular. The last several years, you just have these apartment buildings covered with satellite dishes, and everyone knows that everyone is watching Western and American TV and porn and all the rest of it. And the government has sent in the national police many, many times on a regular basis to rip down those satellite dishes, and they come right back up. So, and we have lots of.
So you could drop bombs through the air and hope to hit whoever the U.S. deems the bad guys are, and likely hit many other people and cause a lot of understandable hatred and fear. Or instead of dropping bombs through the air, you just stream MTV through the air and let it foment a little revolution among the the people there.
Well, you just don't. No, my point is you don't have to do anything.
Right.
I mean,
exactly. You don't have to do it as a concerted effort. You just let the self-interest of the market drive people to try to sell things.
A lot of people have misunderstood my thesis, which I've written about this a couple times in journalistic form, and a lot of people have misunderstood the thesis, and they said, "Oh, well, so the U.S. government should be sending Britney Spears to the Middle East." I said, "No, they don't need to do a damn thing. She's already going there." I mean, so yeah, and then you see these amazing fatwas issued by Islamic clerics in every country in the Middle East, over the last 10 or 20 years. I mean, denouncing everything from Britney Spears to Mickey Mouse to T-shirts to jeans to navel piercings to tattoos.
And I think that's an important. Well, that's an important thing for Americans to realize. It's easy, I think, if you hear one of those fatwas to be like, okay, well, all the people that live in that country, they all think that stuff is terrible. But the reason that someone would issue something like that is because they feel threatened by it, because so many people there in that country, do value it and are consuming it. And that's a good sign. That's a sign that American culture is in demand.
Yeah. I mean, the clerics are not stupid. They know, they know what is a threat to their power. I mean, so Iran, it's really, really clearly happening. Any people should just search around. You can just Google, just Google Iran or Tehran and like any sort of pop cultural form. You can Google rock and roll, hip hop. It's all huge there. And the youth of Iran in particular are just totally uninterested, apparently, in Islam, and very interested in clothes and fashion and rock and roll and hip hop and metal is huge there. Heavy metal is huge there. So yeah, I mean, it's just happening. It's just happening. I mean, it's the days of Islamic fundamentalism are numbered, and it's because of that, not because of the U.S. military.
So how close are you to completing the book?
A couple months.
Okay. And then it goes to the publisher for an unknown amount of time, or a couple months till publication?
Depends on which season they want to publish it in.
Okay.
So it will be either, well, at this point, it's probably going to be, I don't know. It's really up to them.
Yeah.
Last I heard, it might be published in the spring of next year.
Okay. It's always been kind of a black box to me. Like, what happens once a publisher gets a book? Like, what are they doing that takes so long?
Oh, well, for this, so for academic press.
Is this commercial press or academic?
It's Grove Atlantic.
Okay.
Yeah, academic presses take forever and ever because they need to get peer reviews. And they're underfunded and they're understaffed, and so they just take forever and ever. But no, commercial presses can publish a book in weeks, if they want to. It may not be good, but they can publish it very quickly because they have the resources to do it. Usually it depends on, as I said, when they want to publish it, in terms of when it will sell the most. So
let's talk a little about higher education, universities.
Yeah,
so obviously you have felt like you are not getting everything you want out of just being within the traditional academy, and you've been, motivated enough to launch Renegade University. But what is wrong with the modern university? That's a big question.
You tell me. You're the expert.
Well, from someone who's there, you've been in there, yeah. You've been a part of it.
Yeah, so I listened to your talk on this, and you had a great list of reasons. I didn't disagree with anything, and it sort of made me think more carefully about my own problems with it. So I've been a student or a teacher in modern American universities and colleges since 1984, with no break, really. So, and I loved going to college. I went to Antioch College, which is this ultra left, ultra hippie, crazy little underfunded, nutty place in Southwest Ohio. I loved it, but I was always aware that the teaching generally, with a couple of exceptions, was terrible. That the academic rigor was not what I wanted it to be. But I loved being there. I think what I loved most was the voluntary community aspect of it. I loved that I was part of this voluntary community. We all hung out together. We all lived together, ate together. I mean, that would get tired after a while, but it was really great for me when I was 19, 20, 21. I mean, I think I was sort of a lonely, isolated guy as a teenager, as many teenagers are. And I think that was part of the appeal. I had sex for the first time, and that's really, really, really important. I mean, seriously, I think the sex life in college for many people is underappreciated how important that is. But I kind of just went into the world, and I for the first time, and then more importantly for me, well, I don't know if it's more importantly, but it was certainly also important. For the first time, I thought I was smart. I became fairly convinced that I was actually smart and that I had something to say and that I should really be an intellectual. I started to read these books and I could actually sort of have an analysis of them and speak somewhat articulately about them. And I realized this was my home, that the intellectual world was my home. And I had one great teacher at Antioch, and that was crucial, So there's always one or two. I think everyone's had one or two great professors, yeah. And then 60 or 70 bad ones. And that was certainly my experience, both as an undergraduate at a funky little hippie school in Ohio and at Columbia University in graduate school. It was really similar. It's amazing, right? But I had this recurring fantasy. So first of all, when I was at Antioch, I would sit in these classes and I would spend a lot of time imagining or thinking about how I would teach that class differently.
Yeah.
I realized that later. I spent an incredible amount of time during those classes thinking about how I would teach this differently, which is a good sign.
I had the same experience as an undergrad. Well, except I usually spent my time thinking about how I would structure the entire university differently.
Yeah. Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah, all the time, all the time.
So I had that fantasy too, and the recurring fantasy for me was great debates. I wanted it to all be structured around great debates because I knew there had been great debates, historically, but it's like I felt like we weren't ever doing that. It was first of all, it was completely dominated by leftists, right? So they weren't really committed to presenting alternative viewpoints. Um, but I was really into philosophy. That's what I started out studying and got really turned on by that. And I saw it as a history of debates, around big ideas,
Yeah.
right? And I thought, God damn it, if we could just get Nietzsche and Plato in the same classroom and have them fight it out for 2 hours, that would be awesome. But we could simulate that. And in Renegade University, I will simulate that. As a matter of fact, I will have Nietzscheans debate Platonists. Seriously,
Yeah.
and on and on. I will have a Marxist debate a Lockean. God damn it, that's what I wanted in college, and I never really got it. I mean, head to head, head to head.
I would be remiss if I did not remind any of our young listeners or the parents who have children who are younger, and by younger, I mean a few years younger than me, 14 to 26 age range, to check out a summer seminar put on by the Foundation for Economic Education, one of the sponsors of this podcast. FEE.org, the Foundation for Economic Education, is amazing. You will meet with some amazing young people, hear from amazing professors, thinkers, experts, entrepreneurs in engaging talks about the ideas of freedom. You can see one of the talks that I gave at FEE if you want to go to my website and simply search isaacmorehouse.com and search for How to Change the World. Or you can go to YouTube and search for People Over Politics. That's the title of a talk I gave at FEE. It was recorded. It'll give you a flavor. It's about 30 minutes long of what the experience is like, what some of the talks are like. Now, there are certainly lecturers, speakers, activity leaders who are better than I am there, but that will give you a flavor. I love participating in these events. The energy is amazing, and the amount of learning that happens, the light bulb moments, the excitement is palpable. It's unbeatable. FEE.org/seminars. Fill out an application. Tell them you heard about it on the Isaac Morehouse podcast. It's amazing how you've got all these minds here at this institution who are interested in engaging ideas. You have all the pieces there. I mean, in some places you may not have enough representing one view or the other, but there's just something about the way that it's structured, the incentives, that it's so rare. I remember, I had one or two classes, probably two, that I actually remember that were actually really positive experiences. And one was a business class with a guy who was an entrepreneur, and he just taught it on the side for fun. But the other one was a philosophy class, and it was taught by the TA because the professor was sick much of the time. And this TA later, I found out recently he's out of academia and he's doing like a podcast on his own now because his ideas were too radical.
Wow.
But he was, at the time, he was very unabashed when we started. He said, I'm an atheist, blah blah blah, and okay, he's like, let's see a show of hands. I'm not going to pick at anybody. Like, who's an atheist, who's an agnostic, who's a theist? And at the time, I was the only theist in the class. And then so he started making a couple of arguments, and all the kids were sort of going along with, oh, okay, I can see this is like one of those philosophy classes where you sort of poke fun at theism or whatever. And he goes immediately, he would always do this. He would go, wait, when he'd ask a question. I want to hear what the theist thinks first. And then he would put all of them. He'd be like, all of you think that there's no good argument from a theist on this, but I want the theist to make it first, and I want you to debunk him. And he would like put them on the spot, and he'd be like, and I knew if I brought my A game, I'd make it really hard. And most of those kids, even if my argument wasn't very good, most of them just didn't have one. They just thought, yeah, it's one of those classes where you just sort of poke fun at the,
Wow.
you just go along with it. And it was really, really fun. We actually had some good camaraderie, and but I thought, man, why has that only happened once in 4 years?
So I had a similar experience at Antioch. Actually, I actually had two good professors. The second one was he was a total leftist, but he just he wouldn't let us make weak arguments. So I was a hardcore socialist, and I remember in one class we started talking about socialism. I started defending it, and he got up and went to the chalkboard and drew a picture of a house, and he said, "Okay, here's my house, Thaddeus. But you know what? It's not big enough for me. I want to build an addition to my house. Am I allowed to build an addition to my house under socialism?" And I said, well, only if it doesn't exploit the rest of us. And then I said, well, okay, well, I built an addition, but it's not big enough. I want to build it a little bit bigger. Am I allowed to do that under socialism? And I just kept, and it really shook me intellectually. Like that, I think he kind of planted the seed of my anti-socialism, which flowered many years later. Yeah, I mean, that was, as you said, that was like the only time that ever happened.
So
that was yeah.
No. So then you went on into, to get your PhD, and in that process, is there something about the process of getting the PhD and then going and trying to get your first job? Is there something about the process that you think sort of tends to make academics get more bland or have more uniformity in their beliefs? Or is it a self-selection process? The ones who go there just tend to be all one way anyway? Or I don't know. Give me your take as going through it.
Yeah, it's simple. It's a priesthood. Really. I was actually, another book idea I had was one that was going to be called The Last Monastery, about academia. Because that's what it is. It really is. First of all, the modern university, is based on medieval universities, which were cartels or guilds. They were monopolies, intellectual monopolies that were protected by the state and the church. And they operated very much like seminaries. And that was really their function in the society. And that's the model we still have.
As a Yale Divinity School. I mean, most of these started as,
Yeah. So now the priesthood will admit who? Will they admit atheists? Of course not, right? Will they admit, Muslim clerics? No, of course not. They will admit, fellow priests, fellow true believers. So now the true belief, the paradigm can shift over time, which it has done in the modern university. It's shifted some from sort of conservatives to liberal, basically. But in each moment, the priesthood at that time will protect the belief system. So that's what they're there for. And I know this because I used to be one of them, and that was my mission. I remember my application to Columbia Graduate School in history was all about that. It was like, I'm going to teach the history of the people, the workers' history and women's history and black people's history, and I'm going to spread. I forget exactly how I put it. Basically, it was like I'm going to spread the word of the new social history. That's what my mission was, and so I got admitted. I've also heard many very prominent academics admit this. They've said, my mission is to indoctrinate my students. Of course it is. I mean, that's why they're there. They want to spread their ideas. They don't want to challenge their ideas or have their ideas challenged. They want to spread their ideas. Of course, that's why they're there. It's the only platform they have in this society.
It's interesting. There seems to be, it's really common now. And again, 10 years ago, this wasn't very common. It's really common to hear broad criticism of academia all over the place. And you kind of have three aggrieved parties, so to speak, three groups that are critical for different reasons. And I don't know that any of them in most cases are really critical for the right reasons, but one is kind of the macro criticism, or the one that would come from, say, employers or people who just watch the economy as a whole, and they would say all these graduates don't have the skills that they need. And that there's something to that might be right. There's also a very technocratic sort of controlling bent to that at times. It can be like, kids, they should learn this instead of this, that I want them to be widgets that can plug in here, which I don't think is a good critique. Right. Then there's the sort of aggrieved students. And again, they have part of their critique is good. I've spent all this time and money. Now I can't get a job, and now I'm in debt. And there's something to the fact that they've basically been told from their elementary school that all you need to do is go to college and life will be taken care of. It'll be worth it. Look, here's this lifetime earnings chart. So they kind of have been lied to. But on the other hand, just sort of like more college, having it be free, having someone else pay for it, I don't really think that quite gets at it. And then the third aggrieved party, which is a newer one, and I want you to tell me how much of a trend this actually is academics themselves. People within higher education there seems to be a growing chorus of frustration. You mentioned on Facebook that you've had a lot of .edu email addresses on your sign up for Renegade University. What do you think is there a growing chorus of professors who are frustrated with the system and looking for something else?
Well, first of all, there's the army of adjunct labor. They're all frustrated.
Oh, because there's fewer tenure track positions and they're getting these adjunct positions.
So every job I've applied for in modern U.S. history has had about 500 applicants.
Jeez.
That's standard. And it's pretty standard across the humanities and social sciences. I don't know what the sciences are, but I know they're bad too. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are more adjuncts, people without tenure track positions, than there are people with tenure track positions at this point. I know that at my college, at Occidental College, 45% of the classes currently are taught by adjuncts.
Do people know this when they're going to join a PhD program? Oh, it's
astonishing.
It's crazy. Do people know? Do you get are you told the statistics when you apply for PhD program? Hey, every year there's X number of PhDs on the job market and only 10% of them get a job, or is that a surprise?
Well, I mean, so when I was in graduate school, that was the 90s, which it was bad then. It's worse now, but it was certainly bad then. It wasn't really, I wouldn't say it was announced to us. I mean, there was some discussion of it, but it wasn't.
Did you know that you were kind of taking a gamble that you might not get
I thought that I would get a job. Okay. I wasn't sure that I would get a great job. And that actually could have been true. I have to say, I said at the beginning, I am not going to work in Oklahoma. Sorry. I'm not going to take a job at Oklahoma.
Well, that's the thing most faculty member will say when they're on the job market. I just have to move wherever. It might be in the middle of, God knows where.
A lot of them do that, but I was not willing to do that. I was a snob and I had to live on at least one of the coasts, big city on a coast. So I never even applied to a lot of the jobs out there. So I maybe I could have gotten a job somewhere, but I'm glad I didn't. God, I mean that's not the life I wanted. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if that had happened to me. If I'd gotten tenure at Ohio Wesleyan or something, I wouldn't be doing this. And I'm really glad I'm doing this. So, I mean it was talked about. I don't know what goes on now in graduate schools. It would be criminal if they didn't say this to them when they were admitted, because it is truly grim now. And then on top of that, you have these diversity pressures, which are incredible for, it's really hard for white men in particular to get jobs, especially in certain fields. And, every school is just dying for black and brown faces. And it's really
so there's a lot of there's been recent protests and things like this on different campuses, and I haven't gotten too in the weeds on any of this stuff, but I've seen, I don't know if it's if it was just more reporting than normal, but it certainly seemed like a kind of a rash of 4, 5, 6 universities having these big student protests, usually around sort of racial issues or diversity issues. What's the good, the bad, and the ugly here? Is this a good sign that students are fed up with a bunch of bullcrap at universities? Is this a bad sign that students are increasingly babied and entitled and their feelings get hurt too easily? Or is this a fake thing that's put on by faculty and the students don't really care? What's your take?
So first of all, it was at dozens of universities.
Okay. So I always want to be cautious, because if I just see blurbs and they talk, things can get it sensationalized. And so I didn't look into it myself, but you
can go, DeRay Mackison, who's a big Black Lives Matter activist. He actually put together a website, and it's called The Demands or The Demands.
Okay. I've heard of this. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a list of all the schools with all the demands made by students at the schools. And a hefty hefty portion of those demands are absolutely ridiculous, authoritarian, totalitarian, assault on free speech, assault on academic freedom, and the rest of it. So, that's everyone's, well, not everyone's, but many people's first impression. It was my first impression was, oh my God, this is just straight up Maoism. And it's also based on basically spectral evidence of racism, stuff that may or may not have happened or did happen, but wasn't racism, like asking, where are you from? That's a microaggression. No, I'm serious. It's been counted officially as a microaggression by the University of California. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, what is it? Okay. For me, it's rooted in racial liberalism. This is, to me, and I don't want to speak for anyone, so I'm very careful about this. I don't want to speak for black students. I've never been a black student. I've never been a black person, but I do know this, that they are operating within a very particular racial regime, which has dominated American campuses since the 1960s, which I call racial liberalism, right? Which is different than the old. It's a break from scientific racism. This is the regime in which black people are invited to and expected to assimilate into the dominant culture. And so that's why they've been given scholarships. That's why we have affirmative action. They get brought into these colleges and universities to do two things: to assimilate into the dominant culture and to, quote, enrich the experience of the white students who are there. So they have this function, this dual function as students, right? It's not just they get to go to a college and do whatever they want. They are there for a particular reason or set of reasons, which have everything to do with racial politics. So they get treated differently. First of all, they are isolated in most of these schools. They're the one or two black kids in a class full of white kids, right? That alone is going to make anyone crazy after a while. They are expected either explicitly or implicitly to represent their race in classroom discussions. That's why they're there. John McWhorter, he's a very smart, sort of conservative black academic at Columbia. He's made this point repeatedly. That's why they're there. That's what has been said by universities and colleges, to enrich the experience of the white students.
Well, welcome to the class. Now enrich the experience of the rest of us, please.
I mean, if that's not going to make you crazy, right? I don't know what would. And they are splashed all over the cover of the university guidebook to make it look like the college is 50% black when it's actually 7% black. There's just one dishonesty after another after another.
Yeah, if you're like the one black guy or black girl on a small liberal arts campus, you're going to be in every fundraising flyer that ever gets made.
You will be famous. You will be famous. Yeah. And then there's just this, and this really just makes me sick. Sometimes literally sick to my stomach. I mean, there's just incredible patronizing that goes on of black students and black faculty by whites at these schools. I see it all the time.
What kind of form?
They never get
form
challenged.
Does that usually take?
So they'll never get challenged. Okay. They'll say whatever they say is sort of uncritically accepted. They get basically patted on the head for everything they say. They get treated like children. Black faculty. This is happening at my school at Occidental right now. It's just disgusting. It's like, there's only like a handful of black faculty. Generally, it's true at Occidental, but you're supposed to have black faculty on every single committee, right? To be politically correct. And so what happens? They get asked to be on every single committee, right? So these people are constantly being asked to represent their race. How could that not create tremendous resentment among people?
Yeah.
And then. Yeah, I mean, the black students tend to be treated like, frankly, pets. I mean, they're there, they're coddled, they're not challenged. They're put up there as their tokenism is rampant. They're there to make everyone feel better about their white guilt, and to assimilate, you know.
So
So
do you think this is a big, these protests, sort of many of these things, the seeds being in place as you described, it's come to a head. Is this a big cultural moment? You think this is going to create some kind of a long-term shift?
well, I just wanted to say before I go there, but so the weird thing, the difficult thing to understand is how these grievances have been expressed specifically, especially lately. So you do hear complaints in these protests about tokenism, about some, paternalism to some extent. There's a little of that, representing the race. You do hear a lot about that. But mostly the complaints are about things that don't exist. They just don't exist. I mean, so they talk about being physically unsafe on these campuses when in fact these campuses are the safest places in the world for black people or for anyone. They talk about basically white supremacists, segregationists, racists, on campus. I'm sure they're there somewhere, but my God, they are deep underground if they are. And there is absolutely no explicit statements of those ideas, unless, well, if there ever is, those people get expelled immediately.
Yeah.
There's no, come on. I mean, it's all liberals. It's all racial liberals. So there's like, again, I don't want to say to anyone, oh, you're really complaining about something else, but it sure looks that way to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost like there's this feeling of frustration, and when it comes time to sort of give it voice, I don't know, it just seems like the lines that are, I don't know if they're being fed or the lines that are readily available, like you said, they don't seem to be things that are really real big problems, but there are real problems.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
just not finding their way into the narrative somehow.
Since 1984, I have said, it must suck, or it must be difficult, not suck, but it must be difficult to be a black student on one of these campuses. Absolutely, no question about it. Yeah, I mean, I think that they have access to these narratives that have much more resonance in the culture, right? So they connect their experiences to the civil rights movement or to the anti-apartheid movement or to slavery or to Jim Crow, right? And that has tremendous resonance. But it's difficult. I think it's difficult to talk about, racial paternalism or tokenism. So I don't know, but I do know that much of what they talk about simply does not happen. I mean, it's just patently absurd to say you're physically unsafe at Occidental College or at Yale.
Who's saying the most interesting stuff on this, or has the most interesting take? You mentioned, is it John McWhorter?
Yeah, by far, everyone should listen to the series that Glenn Lowry has done on Blogging Heads with John McWhorter. They've had a series of conversations, at least 6 or 7, on this topic over the last several months. I don't agree with everything those guys say. They're definitely more conservative than I am on some things, but they are astonishingly honest about what goes on college campuses. They're both black academics at elite schools, and they say a lot of what I've been saying, but they cut right to the chase, and everyone should look at that.
Do you think there will this be a sort of a boon for, let's say, historically black colleges? Yes. Or other alternative, ways of accessing higher education?
Yes, we've already seen evidence. I've seen HBCUs already say this, that they're getting a rush of applicants from these schools where these protests are happening. And I think that's going to happen. I think HBCUs are going to be the great beneficiaries of this, which I think is a great thing, by the way. I think HBCUs are wonderful. I'm all for them. They've produced, the vast majority, for instance, of the black doctors in the United States come from HBCUs. Martin Luther King went to Morehouse. Spike Lee went to Morehouse. I have several friends who went to Morehouse, Howard, or Spelman, who are now professors or documentary filmmakers or entrepreneurs or public intellectuals. They produce and by the way, they're underfunded, since they're one of the victims of integration. Since then they've had to compete with Harvard and Yale and the rest of them. So they're underfunded compared to the other elite schools, but they produce tremendous alumni. So I think that's going to be great.
I know more about Morehouse College than probably any other small school because I've had so many people through my life when they meet me say, "Oh, I thought you'd be a black guy because your name is Isaac Morehouse." You know, like I don't know, Isaac the bartender from the Love Boat or something. Morehouse College, who knows? Yeah. So when it comes to your sort of desire to move beyond being I don't want to say chained, but we'll say it, chained only to academia, sure, being able to launch Renegade University, et cetera. What do you say to someone who says, but Thaddeus, the universities, they need people like you to reform them from within, to help make, what's your response?
I just gave my response. God.
That's how I feel about getting involved in politics. So
my politics is anti-responsibility, first of all. So I mean, that is not my responsibility. I did not create those things. It's not my business. Sorry. I mean, I'd much rather reform them from without. And I think historically, most of the great change has come from without, actually. Pressures from outside. By the way, I was going to tell you, did you see this thing about the MIT dean who is leaving her job to form an independent research university that will have
somebody sent me a link. I didn't read it.
Yeah, check it out.
That's amazing.
It's happening. It's happening. There's more and more of us. I think the MOOCs were just a beginning. Yeah. And all they did was sort of demonstrate that there's a market for this. But I think you're going to see more and more academics leave and do what I'm doing.
Yes. Well, this is what we talk about with Praxis a lot, is that I think in the first wave of changes to higher education, it was all the innovations were based on the assumption that what higher education is a product people purchase to obtain information. And that's really not what they're purchasing. So there's all these innovation. Okay, now here's a new way to convey just raw information via videos and whatever else. And that's part of it. But really, it's this whole bundle that includes things like the social setting, the network you build, the interactivity, but also primarily the signal to employers that says you should hire me. And that's where I think the real breakthrough is, building those alternate signals. And then what that will do, I think, things like Renegade University will be so much higher quality because it's not attached to a signal that will supposedly get you a job. I think the credential has sort of killed the classroom, because when you go in a classroom, the kids don't want to be there, and they're happy when class is canceled, because class is a cost so they must endure in order to get the ticket to a job. And once you separate those and say, okay, demonstrate your worthiness to employers by some other means, come up with some other signal that indicates your value as an employee. But in terms of your pursuit of knowledge, this is why if you go to a seminar that's put on by a nonprofit that doesn't offer college credit, the quality of the discourse is so much higher, because you're self-selecting people who are not there to get a resume booster so much as to engage the idea. So I think this is going to be a really, really great evolution that happens. And people who just want the ideas and are not looking at it as a magical ticket to job security, it's going to create much higher quality interaction for things like what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it has to do with the respect accorded to the person teaching the course, right? So if it's taught by a public intellectual who's well respected, and it's on your resume that you took this class with X person who is a well-respected public intellectual, why wouldn't an employer look at that kindly, right? Why wouldn't they think that that is a real credential, right? That's important to them.
And particularly if it's something that was not, sort of required of you. You went and did this of your own initiative,
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, and also if it's accompanied by, a quote, a blurb from that guy. If it says Thaddeus Russell says, so Isaac Morehouse was a wonderful student. He wrote this fabulous paper for me and was so brilliant in so many ways. Isn't that going to count more than just a BA from Penn?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So,
yeah, it's the world is just starting to crack into these sort of alternative, I just call them alternative signaling mechanisms for ways to say that this is how you can verify that I'm worth something, that I'm capable of doing something. And I mean, Google alone has already changed. Like, Google is your new resume, right? If I Google your name, that's going to mean a lot to me. That's going to tell me a lot if you can leave a sort of digital paper trail, et cetera. So this is really exciting stuff. Now, are you scared? Are you worried about sort of getting pushback from academia?
Oh, I'm not worried about that. Maybe I should be. I don't. They're going to send out the drones. Um, it's funny. I mean, academia has basically just ignored me since I came out with Renegade History 6 years ago. I mean, there's just been no response at all really from academia.
So it's more just the typical sort of entrepreneurial fears, like what if this doesn't work?
So far, yeah, yeah.
It's normal.
I mean, I think it will work. I just don't know how well it will work. I don't know how big it will be. I want it to become a movement.
Yeah,
I want it to end up, hiring some of those adjunct brilliant professors who can't get
yeah,
jobs,
absolutely.
and changing the whole goddamn system. So
Oh,
I think it's going to happen. I think that higher education in my lifetime will be revolutionized, and I do think what I'm doing will be part of it.
I absolutely agree. I have this sort of analogy in my mind that there's this wave that's coming, and we're not sure exactly when it's going to come. You're seeing little bits of it here and there. That just when I look at people who apply to Praxis, for example, little by little, there's this growth and there's an increasing number of peoples. And you can look by age. Kids who are in high school now are so much less likely to say, yes, I'm absolutely going to college and I wouldn't consider any alternative than kids who are, 20, 22. There's kind of something's happening. They're seeing all the people with the debt and, not knowing what to do and sort of aimlessly going to grad school to take take on more debt. So I'm with you. It's gonna happen, and hopefully, people like you and I can be on the front edge of that and help speed up the process.
I think so. I think so. I agree.
Thaddeus, this was awesome. You can go to thaddeusrussell.com to sign up for updates on the launch of Renegade University.
Yes.
Okay, thaddeusrussell.com. Check it out. We will also be on the lookout for your new book. Maybe it's a year from now, maybe it's 6 months, but regardless, I'd love to bring you back on at a later date to discuss that and everything else that you're up to.
That'd be great.
Keep breaking
Thanks
the
so
rules.
much.
Yep.
All right, man. Thank
See
you.
ya.